Hi there, this is Sensei Ronnie Smith, and in this video I want to talk about this book, British Aikido History, the story of two pioneers from Kenshiro Abbey, who's that guy there, from the Kenshiro Abbey era. Abdul Rashid, Henry Ellis, Derek Eastman are the authors. The book is written from the perspective of Henry Ellis for most of it. Henry Ellis and some of the others, but definitely Henry Ellis puts himself across as a pioneer in Aikido. And this is his story of the history of Aikido which he was involved in. And it is very centered on his perspective in his history, which is fine. The story basically goes that the first person to bring Aikido over to the UK, according to the book, was Kenshiro Abbey. Kenshiro Abbey was a judo champion in Japan, and perhaps famously or not famously, I don't know if the judo world knows of Kenshiro Abbey as so well. I don't actually know how well he's known in judo, but he defeated the famous Kimura. And in judo there is a particular pin or submission called a Kimura, which comes from this Japanese champion Kimura, and Kenshiro Abbey defeated Kimura as one of the few people that did. Kimura defeated Helio Gracie, the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, just for some extra information there. But Kenshiro Abbey was a judo champion and became a student of Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido. The story goes in the book, whether it's real or not, that Kenshiro Abbey met Morihei Ueshiba on a train, and that Morihei Ueshiba knew who he was and challenged him to break his finger, and ended up pinning him easily on the floor of the train. And Kenshiro Abbey became a student of his afterwards. So there's a lot of fantastic stories in the book. There's a lot of great stuff. And Kenshiro Abbey ended up coming to Europe basically to teach judo, and ended up in the UK teaching judo. And so what we learn, firstly, is, so the book does a great job of telling us this history, that Aikido's spread in Europe and perhaps in the UK seems to be hand in hand with judo. So judo was already an established martial art, as was jiu-jitsu, I believe, Japanese jiu-jitsu. Were already established arts to some degree in the UK. They might not have been household names, but they were established. And there were clubs already around the UK doing judo. It's definitely around England, and I think in Scotland as well. So there was already this foundation in place when Kenshiro Abbey came to teach judo, and one of his students was Ken Williams, who was a third dan judoka. And this is another piece of the Aikido history, that a lot of the early Aikido people were judo people. So a lot of the early Aikido people in Japan were judo people, and also in the UK. And Kenshiro Abbey started to obviously teach a bit of Aikido to a small group of students, and that included Henry Ellis, Ken Williams, Derek Eastman, and a few others that are named in the book. So there's a small group, and it was at the famous Hut Dojo, which was actually called Abe Schools of Budo, named after Abe Sensei. You can really tell in this book that Henry Ellis really looks up to Abe Sensei, and a lot of them, they hold this guy in high regard, and a number of them talk about how his judo was fantastic, apparently. Now, he created a style of judo called Kyushindo, which was a slightly different style to the classic judo. And there's an interesting comment in the book where someone goes, everyone would agree that Abe Sensei was the best, but his style never created other champions. So he was the one guy that could make his system work, apparently, and others have not been able to use that style to win competitions and so on in judo. So that's quite interesting. I think Abe Sensei was quite successful in judo terms and had lots and lots of people. And there's stuff about the Judo Council and the martial arts board and the British Aikido board and all this stuff in the book. But this is where it all really started, Aikido in the UK, is these classes at the Hut Dojo, which involved Ken Williams, who was the first black belt and the first student of Aikido in the UK, according to the book, and that he was really the first black belt and the first teacher and everything based in the UK. So the history goes around to Kenshiro Abe. What the book tells us of, though, is of so many different teachers that came over, and it's fascinating to me that these teachers were just kind of being sent over from Japan in some way when Aikido there wasn't really anyone to teach. There wasn't anything that had been developed as far as I could see. It wasn't this big thing. So somehow these students are coming over from Japan. I don't know if they've got any money. I don't know who would have given them money. I don't really understand that part of it. Perhaps, and this is where you start to think about Aikido, about the Aikikai, about Hombu, the links they had to maybe political connections and money and stuff, and where they'd been given money to try and spread Japanese culture around the world. I don't know. It's kind of an interesting part of it, but why were these Japanese coming over to these clubs that hadn't really developed and they didn't have a way of making an income or whatever? And it's just kind of fascinating, and even like citizenship wise, how could they just come over and work in the UK? Like, I don't know, maybe the rules were different then, but it's all kind of fascinating, right? But all these various great teachers were coming over and teaching these guys in the early days. What Henry Ellis paints is a portrait of a very tough training environment in the early days of the Hut Dojo. And he kind of is lamentful or regretful or whatever throughout the book of what he sees as a dilution of Aikido, of flower power Aikido, of Yukis just running around, throwing themselves all over the place. And there's many people that still make those kind of criticisms of Aikido to this day. Now, you can see some early footage of the Hut Dojo, and you can make a decision for yourself as to whether you think it was way different or not. And a number of the teachers from the Hut Dojo days, Chiba Sensei, Noro Sensei, I think some of these guys, Nakazono, they went on to, you can see other videos of these guys, so you can see that if you like. But he's talking about like kicking and punching and fights in the car park and kind of a bit of a wild type. So there's a lot of great stories about that. And the early days of demonstrations where they were doing demonstrations and, it could go a bit far, right? There's also the great story of how him and Derek Eastman were basically sent by Sensei Williams, just go out there and spread Aikido. And they just went around the country in a car, visiting judo clubs and saying, do you want a demonstration of Aikido? Do you want to learn a bit of Aikido? Which is quite an amazing thing to do, really, if you think about it. And how much of that had an influence or had an impact on the spread of Aikido. So it seems like Henry Ellis, you could tell he was a very passionate person, that he really gave a lot of his life to Aikido. He really took it very seriously, and he's made sacrifices to share it. So I think the book helps us to understand Aikido history in the UK. I think the book is probably going to be of interest to virtually anyone with an interest in Aikido. For people in the UK, I think it's a great book for understanding some of the early history. And you get to know this character, Henry Ellis, and his attitude and who he was and the way they trained, or the way that he portrays that they trained. I always think that when people ever look back on their training, they always seem to say, oh, it was really tough back in my day. It was way tougher back in my day. And I don't know, right? I don't know if that's ever truly the case, but this is what what people seem to think a lot. And well, it's not as tough as it used to be. Fair enough, you know. Now, what would I say are some of the other benefits of this book? Great stories, really great stories. It is a well written book. It's very easy to read. It's very conversational style. It's very logical in how you go through it, and you feel like you're just chatting to Henry Ellis. It's like he's just a kind of an interesting guy to listen to, and you know there's so much in it, and you can just see his respect for his teachers and the various people that were involved. Now the other side of this is that part of the reason that made him want to make this book was also to try and maybe correct some history, because I think that certainly there's a character, I don't know, there's certain people in the book that he thinks are trying to make out that they were a big part of Aikido history, and they weren't really. And he was trying to set this all straight from his position and show his evidence about that. I'm not sure how much he needs to do that, but he certainly made quite a portion of the book to sort of setting certain things straight, which is fair enough. But sometimes it does go into a feeling of, does he really need to do this? Is he getting a little bit petty at points? Is he getting a bit jealous at points? Because there might be others that went on and did more in Aikido in terms of started more clubs, developed bigger organizations, may have ended up having more of an influence. And this book doesn't really go into any of that. So there's a timeline in the book, but it's really his timeline mostly, and it doesn't talk about any of the other teachers, any of the other organizations that developed. And so it's not a comprehensive history of Aikido in the UK. It's a fairly comprehensive history of the very early days of the Hut Dojo and stuff that came out of that, and stuff that came out of some of those early pioneers. But he's not going into a full comprehensive history of like because Aikido has now got hundreds of clubs around the country, I would imagine, and maybe not very big clubs, but hundreds of clubs, thousands of, I think, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of practitioners around the country. I don't know how many, I really don't, but thousands and thousands. And there's many other influences that came in different teachers and different people, and he's not really mentioning any of that, or different styles of Aikido that might have came in. So he's not going into all that, which is fair enough. He's going into his personal history. I think there's maybe more I would have liked to have understood about his own teaching, his own clubs, his own organisations, and how that all went. And there's not a lot about that, about his training, and I think him and Derek Eastman remained active teaching. There is a really good thing about the Abe Sensei Memorial event, which sounds like a fantastic event. There was hundreds of people there, really well organised, and that so there's a lot of stuff there where you can see where his focus lies. He loves these things of giving that honour in his teachers, getting everyone together. He likes the honesty and the truth. You know, this is what this guy's all about. This comes across. But sticking to his method and style of Aikido and everything. So it's definitely a worthwhile book. There's a few bits here that are written by Derek Eastman. There's profiles of different Aikido teachers in it. There's documents and letters and things. and some newspaper reports, and it's a fun and easy to read book. So I've learned a few things from it. I've enjoyed it, and I would recommend it to you. I don't know if I want to give it a rating or anything, but I would rate it as certainly definitely worth a read. And I think everyone in the UK would learn something from it. Now, outside of that, what do I see with some of Ellis's arguments? For example, someone suggested to me Ellis isn't a pioneer. He was just there in the early days. I don't know. I think a pioneer, if you're in the first class, pretty much, if you're like one of the first guys, no one else is doing it. So you're going around and people are saying, "What is it you're doing?" And you say Aikido. No one knows what you're doing. I think that's quite pioneering. I think the fact that he was going around the country, he was involved in demonstrations, he met and helped out the first teachers. I would see him as a pioneer. Now, what of his influence of Aikido going forward? This style that he talks about, that is this tight style, this, fighting style, this punching, kicking, knocking lumps out of each other. Everyone's got lumps, everyone's got bumps. This style. Has this become the style? Well, it tends to be the case that that's not what people have come to Aikido for in general. It's not what's known about Aikido. It's not what is interesting about Aikido for most people. And for most people that want to knock lumps and bumps out of each other, they probably would go to something else, right? In terms of a kind of combat style of Aikido, that's not really become the norm, I would say, and it's not what the focus of Aikido has become. So this Hut style, I'm not sure if that's really proliferated. And the early footage of the Hut that I've seen, some of the footage, it doesn't really show this rough and tough style, people being punched, people being kicked. It's not really showing that from what I'm seeing, from what I've seen. But at the end of the day, what I'm seeing is demonstration stuff. And in demonstrations, often it is choreographed to look good rather than to maybe be effective. So it might have been the case these were just demonstration examples that I'm seeing. But that style of training, for better or worse, that style of training hasn't become the predominant style. And other teachers, quite frankly, came in and probably had more of an impact than Henry Ellis in Aikido. Ken Williams himself started the Key Federation, which has in its time had many hundreds of clubs, many thousands of students run through it, and still has dozens of clubs, I think. So the Key Federation is still a force and still a big influence in Aikido, or has been a big influence in Aikido in the UK. And some have said to me, one friend of mine said Ralph Reynolds, who was an early Hut practitioner, that he believed Ralph Reynolds had a bigger influence than Henry Ellis. Now, I'd never heard of Ralph Reynolds, but apparently he was quite influential in the Midlands. You've got the Awama schools, the influence of Saito Sensei. He doesn't really mention Saito Sensei in the book. Chiba Sensei had some influence. He does mention Chiba and look up to him, although he left, I think, quite early to go over to the US. And you've got other teachers and other styles that have been involved in Aikido that perhaps had more influence. Now, Henry Ellis is an older man. I think he's in his 90s. I think he is still alive. But I've not really... It's interesting because I've not really met many people who said that they trained with him or went to courses with him or anything. So, in a sense, maybe this book is him trying to reclaim his position as a pioneer when perhaps he's not been given the respect that he gives to all of his peers and his teachers, and maybe he feels like he's been left behind a little bit, and maybe he has. So it's an interesting book. It brings up a lot of different concepts and ideas and stories, and he's putting right a certain future. And I did really feel like I got a sense of the early days, the Hut Dojo, some of the characters, and that kind of spirit that's in place when something is starting off, when something is still finding itself, when a group of people are still coming together and trying to get something going. And I love that. I love that part of a story when it's just the start and everyone's trying to get it going and trying different things out and putting it out there and seeing what works and driving around the country and demonstrating it and all that. So it's an amazing story, great journey. Well done for writing it. Thank you to my friend Ranald for lending me the book. And this guy here, Abe Sensei. Apparently quite a fascinating guy, a great judo guy, Aikido guy, and a big influence in the martial arts in the UK. So thanks very much for watching, everyone. If you want more videos about Aikido, if you'd like more book reviews, feel free to write down below and let me know if you want some Aikido book reviews or other book reviews, probably Aikido book reviews. And if any of you are in Glasgow and you want to come along to Aikido, I can't promise that it's going to be lumps and bumps, kicking and punching style of Henry Ellis that we do at my class, the Ronnie School of Budo, the Palace of Art club. Not a hut, we practice in a palace. So Aikido went from a hut to being in palaces now. The Palace of Art in Glasgow on Monday nights. Feel free to turn up, 7:30 p.m. Everyone's welcome to come. And you can join the mailing list at the website, aikidoforglasgow.com. Very welcome to get in touch, come along, and see you soon. Thank you very much.